what your hands are doing.
Right. So the thing I noticed about radiation burn was on Marcia. She's the one that started that class where you met me, right?
Yeah.
You know, in North Carolina, I think it was, yeah. Something like that. Anyway,
Yeah.
So Marcia had this overdose of radiation from the 1950s where they blasted her with radiation, and she ended up with leather-like brown, really brown skin. And she was fair. Her complexion was not normally this kind of a walnut brown almost. And it was hard, almost like you could knock on it and make a little ringing sound come back like wood. It was solid color pretty much, but it had a little modeling in it. And it was very hard. They had really overdosed her. They'd done a horrific surgery where they took out down to the intercostal muscles. They don't do any of this anymore. But this is the 50s, and it was done at Stanford University, which was about as good as it gets in the day, right? So she had this massive half a chest worth from breast cancer, breast removal, massive area of brown. It was at least as big as my two hands, right? All this area was just brown on her chest. And it was hard and unyielding, no pliancy. You couldn't see any muscle. They'd stripped as much as they could. I think they left her a little bit of pec minor and a little bit of pec major, but just a little bit. They'd taken everything else. So she was a real mess. She could, nothing was moving on that side. And they had overdosed her so much with radiation that they killed the lung on that side and had to pull it. So they had taken the lung out because they'd killed it with radiation. So they don't do anything like this anymore. So the only place you'd find it is in very old surgical scars and stuff like that. But people get radiation, and the radiation people say that, oh, you're not going to feel anything. And you know what? They do. They feel a tightening up deep in, stuff stops working. It's hard to get it open. It's hard to take a breath if it's in the rib cage from breast cancer. So they don't realize what they're doing. They think nothing happens. You'll be just the same as you were before, but people are not. So what I felt when I felt her chest wall was that it was hard, it was dense. There was no resilience or bounce to it. And I thought it's as though somebody took and chopped all that stuff, all the radiation stuff up into itty bitty pieces so there were no long strands left. And it all kind of sunk down into a mass and consolidated. Excuse me. So that's what it felt like. So I thought to myself, what it needs is long fiber. If I can introduce the long fiber idea back in, and I remembered Gimberto's video, the one we always watch, right? That's inspired me with it. What I realized was that as the pull in the fascia changes, as the pull in the body changes, the fascial things line up with the pull. You create them, right? From how you're moving or how you're pulling. If you pull on your tissue, you're going to create lines of fascia stress along there. So I thought, well, it doesn't need to be reassembled. It needs to be like introduce what's missing, right? So on a thought, I started doing what I call the real dense brown radiation stuff. It's the color, let's see. It's the color of mahogany. Kind of a lightish color than the deepest mahogany, but it's like mahogany brown, right? So I got my hands. Can you see my hands?
Yep.
You can see. Maybe I'll turn this way.
Perfectly.
Yeah, like so. So I got my hands on the tissue, laying them on very lightly, just letting them sink in, kind of like you do the cat or any of the things like that. And then I pulled. See, creating a line, right?
Yeah.
Pulled, and then I pulled. And it's like stretching saltwater taffy.
Okay.
That's what I call it, right? If anybody from the East Coast, Atlantic City still sells saltwater taffy, probably, right? It was famous for that, right? So I thought of that, of pulling the different tissues in all these different directions this way, okay? Slow and easy, but, and then you want to go down a little deeper and do it some of the deeper levels. You can also do that skidding stuff off the bottom to treat radiation, right? So you go down, pin everything, and then just slide it, slide it back and forth, that kind of skidding. Big, it's not big picture skidding, but it's skidding on the deepest level to try to get through all that stuff. And it worked.
Wow. Okay.
I did one little bit of work like that on her. And then I did the rest of ScarWork. And then she came back the next day to get more because it had helped her so much. And when I saw her 6 months later at the class that she arranged that I first met you at, right? She looked fantastic. All that deep brown hard stuff was gone, absolutely gone. The only thing you could see left of it was an itty bitty little freckle kind of thing. Just a few of them, not a lot. It wasn't like covered in like, total freckles like redheads get. But it was just maybe, I don't know, I wouldn't be able to count it, but maybe 7 or 8 little tiny dots. And the only reason I realized it was the radiation was that unique color. It still had that color. And I thought, my God, all that brown stuff is reduced down to 7 dots on her. That's insanely good, right? And everything below the surface level of the skin had regained its fat. So she had soft, pliant skin. Fat cells came in there and filled it in. There was pliancy, there was stretch, there was all kinds of things. And she just looked incredible. I could not believe how wonderful she looked, right? And I looked at her and I said, oh my God, because I didn't realize it would go on. I do people and they go away, right? I don't get to see them over and over again unless it's one of my clients. And how many clients do I have with the radiation? Not all that many, thank heavens.
Right.
So seeing this was just phenomenal. And that's when, she must have seen the surprise on my face because she grabbed me one hand at each shoulder. She grabbed me, right? And she looked me dead in the eye and she said, you have to teach. You will, right? And so what do I say to this wonderful woman? I said, yes, ma'am. Right? I'm on the way. So, because I kind of thought that, what the heck? It's only me, so what would I have of interest, right? But that really, really changed for me at seeing her chest wall. And she regained the complete range of motion in her hand. She couldn't bring her arm up, I think, was like not even shoulder level before. And then she had all this going on. She could do anything. It was amazing. And so Marcia, bless her, is the one that really gave me a kick,
She started the ball rolling in South Carolina, convinced us all to take the course.
This is what happens for people with this kind of problem.
Yeah.
I can't not teach it everywhere.
Yeah.
I can't just kick back and once in a while I'll do a class. I have to really take it on the road. It's so fantastic. I kind of waited for bone work because I thought it wouldn't go over.
Yeah.
Bone work's about 10 years behind ScarWork.
Yeah, it's coming though. It's coming in the wake of ScarWork. So you were just describing the really dense brown leathery. Do you have any different thoughts about the reddish sort of capillary damage that we might see as well?
You can get rid of most of that reddening by just featherlight sweeping.
Okay.
If you hit the right layer with it, that comes out. So that's just this regular stuff everybody knows. But paying attention to where you are in the tissue really does help. Because as you do the sweeping, you get down through it. It's probably slower because it's dense. So the layers aren't as apparent of the different planes you get into and how far down you are because it's just so solid, right? But yeah, it was quite interesting. And the other radiation stuff that is not the overdose level where it kills the lung, right? It's a frightening thought, but that the overdose level notwithstanding, regular radiation also constricts it. And it usually constricts it on the deeper levels. So it's down a ways. So you don't feel it on the surface so much, but you can feel those strictures. And I use the same kind of idea with it.
Okay. The spreading, which is a little bit different than we typically do.
I never do that.
Yeah.
I never stretch tissue and try to pull it apart. But this is not stretching tissue and pulling it apart. It's creating a line that the tissue can line up to.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And, because you see in Gumberto's video, these things split and they change direction and vector. And he says that, in order to achieve the final gesture, he says, is how he says it, that the tissues line up too, so we can achieve the final gesture. I probably know all the words to that video.
You memorized it by now.
Yeah, I know. I was like, it's in there. Anyway, so it's just that it's not like you're really stretching hard. You're just coming through just enough to connect. And you have to go down to the same level with both hands so it makes a line. You can't have one heavy and one light, or unless you need to go up, right? Then you could do something, but just a little. So it's very light. It's just lining up, pulling the stress through it so that the fabric of the fascia, those little tiny strands, have something to line up to. And once you've done it, you've done it.
Great.
So you go all over the place, every which direction you might imagine that arm would use. Once it gets the initial input of encouraging it to make fascia, it keeps it. It doesn't go away, which I would thought it would, right? But it doesn't go away, and you can build on it.
Great.
So that's quite remarkable about tissue, that it can actually come back from such a shock.
Horrific thing. Yeah, thank you for showing us and demonstrating that. There was a question, and this provides a good visual answer.
Yeah, so I would use the skinning to get it loose off the bone and stuff. Maybe go in at the superficial level and start, and then work down into it a little bit, and then skid off the bone so you get the whole thing. You get the whole mass, right? And then do that same thing down and below, because it's three-dimensional, of course. So just every which way you can think of. Spend a fair amount of time on it, because the results are phenomenal.
Great.